What's up, ladies and gentlemen? In today's video, I'm going to show you 5 different gambits that you should never accept. And like always, this study is going to be full of traps and tricks that you can try out against your opponents. But before I do that, you can do me a favor, guys, by subscribing to my channel if you're new, and also hit the like button if you will find this video helpful. Right, let's get started. The first gambit that you should never ever accept is the Vienna Gambit. The Vienna Gambit is where white starts with e4 and you go e5, knight c3, knight f6. Then instead of bishop c4, white plays the immediate pawn to f4. Levy has done a great job of shedding more light on this gambit. The problem with e takes f4 is that white can now play pawn to e5, attacking your knight, and as you can see, it only has one safe square to go to, which is the g8 square, forcing you to undevelop your knight, and here white will play knight to f3. And let's say you play pawn to d6, the top played move, well, white can simply play pawn to d4, solidifying their center. Let's say d takes e5, white doesn't have to take, you can just go queen e2. And again, if you continue playing the top played move knight c6 for example, this bishop takes f4. Your e5 pawn is pinned to the king, so it can't take white's bishop. So let's say you go bishop d6 or bishop e7, it doesn't matter. White can easily castle long, and look at this, your pawn is pinned to the king, and your dark squared bishop is about to be pinned to your queen. This is only move 9 and black is losing. So that's just one disadvantage of taking on f4. The move that I recommend is pawn to d5. In most of these e4 gambits, pawn to d5, guys, is the secret move. Even in the Scotch gambit, if e takes d5, you just take back. At the end of the day, you just want to simplify the game. You can exchange queens, but there's no need to if you have something better to do. Queen h4 check provokes a weakness. If pawn to g3 for example, now you have queen e4 check, and on the next move you're going to win. White's rook on h1 for free. By the way, your queen can never be trapped because you have bishop g4 and white is dead. Their light squared bishop is still pinned to the king, by the way. So let's look at something else. After you go queen h4, if white doesn't play pawn to g3, and let's say they go king d2, well, you can just go queen g5 check. You know, trying to find a nice spot where you can put your opponent in zugzwang, or maybe threaten to checkmate them as soon as you can. So once again, you're just putting your pieces on their most active squares. You're not mating anytime soon, but you're just one move away from castling long or even castling short. It's up to you. So this is how you can fight the Vienna Gambit. Let's look at what else you can do against the Vienna Gambit. After pawn to f4, you still go pawn to d5, and here you're going to see most of your opponents taking on e5 with their f pawn. That's what you want, because now you can easily take their e4 pawn, and if knight takes, you take back with your pawn. We don't have a knight to develop on f6, so we are cool. But on the other hand, white's knight is still on g1, which they can't develop on f3 because of our pawn. If let's say pawn to d4, well, you can simply take with ampersand, and if bishop takes d3, the top played move, you have all sorts of moves that you can play. Knight c6, bishop c5, queen e7, or even more actively, queen h4 check to provoke a weakness on the king side, and that's when you bring back your queen. This is how we play chess, ladies and gentlemen. This is a very big deal when it comes to square weaknesses. Anyways, let's say knight f3, you have knight c6, you still want to take the e5 pawn. If castle short, well, you can take and play pawn to f6, but just go bishop g4 just to avoid this pin on your knight. So let's say bishop f4, you can simply castle long, and now it's white's bishop which is pinned to the queen. Anyways, sometimes I go over these moves very fast in order to beat time. Besides, you can always slow down the video on YouTube and start hearing my voice in a drunken state and call me your drunken master. Anyways, back to our initial position where I advised not to take on f4 after white plays pawn to f4. So once again, you go pawn to d5. If e takes f4, you simply take on e4. If knight takes, you go d takes e4. Again, if d4, you take with ampersand, and we just finished looking at what to do if white takes with a bishop, but if they take with the queen, like Grandmaster Igor Smirnov likes saying, to take is a mistake. The thing is, if you take your opponent's queen, you're going to help them activate their light squared bishop once they take on d3. So better go queen h4 check to avoid the queen trade. If pawn to g3, you go queen e7 once again. Right, let's move on to the next gambit. The second gambit that you should never accept is the Rusio Gambit, which is kind of a mirror of the Vienna Gambit. Now you're playing white. This is where you start with e4, then black plays e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, and then black plays pawn to f5. So once again, just like in the Vienna Gambit, never ever take on f5 if you don't want to die early, because once again, if you take, you're allowing black to push his e-pawn, just like what you saw in the Vienna Gambit. And let's say you play the top plate move knight g1, or seeing that you are behind in development, black can even play knight to f6 here, just to stop queen h5 check. Let's say knight c3, they can go pawn to d5. And again, the top plate move, which is a losing mistake, is bishop b5, because black can easily go pawn to d4, forcing you to undevelop the second knight. And this is when they take back their pawn on f5. Look at how active black's position is, and look at all your pieces. So this is one disadvantage of accepting the Rusio Gambit. Never ever accept the Rusio Gambit. So what do I recommend instead of taking on f5? The move, once again, ladies and gentlemen, is pawn to d4. Just pretend as if you're playing the Scotch Gambit. Yeah, this kind of looks like the Scotch Gambit, except for this pawn. So if they play f takes e4, once again, you go knight takes e5. If they take, which is a mistake by the way, you simply take back, and now they can't even develop their knight like they do normally. If they go queen e7, the top plate move, bishop f4 is a decent move. But hey, there are many ways of killing a rat. Knight c3 is also a move, allowing black to take that pawn. Because you have knight d5, it looks like you are threatening to take on c7, which is why most black players play pawn to c6, but the idea is to go bishop f4 this time. Now you want to go knight c7 check and win that poor rook on a8. If they play queen takes b2, you don't resign. Yeah, you just go rook b1 and they'll play queen a3, once again the top plate move, after which you can play all sorts of things, but hey, always look for best moves. Queen h5 check is the best move, because if pawn to g6, you have queen e5 check. Let's say knight e7, that leads to mate in 2, ladies and gentlemen. In this position, the only move for black is king d8, after which you go queen c7, checkmate. Back on move 3, what I recommend is just to go pawn to d4 instead of taking. And this time, if they take on d4 instead of taking on e4, you just go for simplification. You clear the center, making sure that you are the only one who is active. If f takes e4, let me ask you a question. Do you take on e4 or not? Okay, this is ridiculous. Obviously, you're going to say, no, you don't take on e4 because I asked you. So I highlighted the problem. Queen takes e4 is the top plate move, but the best that an advanced player can do in this position is taking the knight. Why? Because white has prevented black from castling short ever in his lifetime. Again, you have an option to take or maybe go queen e5 check. None of that. The move is queen d5. The rook is undefended. So you force it to go back. Again, do you take or go queen e5 check? Nope. The move is queen h5 check. Why? Because you know if king e7, you have bishop g5 check and you're going to win the queen. But if pawn to g6 blocking the check, which was the main purpose of playing queen h5 check, now this is when you go queen e5 check, which also comes with the threat of winning the rook on h8 for free. So that's how strong players play chess. Don't worry, you'll be able to find all these moves when you develop this kind of patience and the art of playing active chess instead of rushing to make moves. Anyways, the third gambit that you should never accept in your life, I'm a bit ashamed of saying this, but it is the Queen's Gambit. Don't shoot me, I know, but hey, after d4, d5 and pawn to c4, listen, in my last video that has popped up in the card above, I advised beginners and intermediate level players to take on c4 with a view of simplifying the game and opening up the position, because I believe that most beginners and intermediate level players don't do well in closed positions. However, as you keep on advancing in your chess, declining the Queen's Gambit is the most stable thing you can do. But hey, it's not much of a stretch. Grandmasters also play the Queen's Gambit accepted. So if you think you are an aggressive player like me, it's fine to go with the Queen's Gambit accepted. But if you want to be solid and positional, just play the QGD, which I have demonstrated on the board. So pawn to e6. And from here, let me show you a simple repertoire that you can adopt. They'll play knight c3, the top plate move. Now you go pawn to c6, called the accelerated semi-Slav defense. So in the opening stage, you're only going to be playing with your pawns, such as pawn to h6, pawn to s6. You will delay knight to f6 as long as you can, and once you play knight to f6, The other move that you want to play is d takes c4 so that you can plant that knight on d5, and oversimplifying the game, you'll see how that works. For example, after you play pawn to c6, it looks like white can play pawn to e4, dominating the center completely, but this is actually bad for white because of d takes e4, and after knight takes, you go bishop b4 check. If they block with their bishop, which is the top played move, that hangs their pawn on d4, so you take it. If bishop takes b4, you take the knight. Who is better in this position? I think it is black. And again, if they don't block the check on b4 with their bishop, but instead with the knight, well, these are the positions where you want to play, like the queen's gambit accepted, you go pawn to e5 immediately. Because if d takes e5, the top played move for some reason, which is a mistake, you have queen takes d1. And after king takes, if you want, you can mess up white's pawn structure on the king side, or better go bishop f5, making sure that you are the first one controlling these active lines, ladies and gentlemen. Done. So back on move 3 after pawn to c6. We have seen that pawn to e doesn't work for white, so that's why they played the top played move knight to f3. White's pawn on d4 is now defended. So there's no queen takes d4 in the near future after bishop b4 check. That's why here you can play knight to f6, or probably play this in the stonewall defense style. But hey, just go knight to f6, stopping pawn to e4 this time. So they'll play bishop g5, pinning your knight. They still want to go pawn to e4, by the way. So you just go bishop e7. If pawn to e3, the top played move, you just castle short. Guys, the whole battle is on the center of the board when it comes to the QGD. The fourth gambit that you should never accept is the old Benoni, where you start with pawn to d4 and then black plays c5. You don't want to take on c5 because if you do so, black will start developing every move with a tempo based on your misplaced pawn on c5. For example, starting with e6. By the way, if you try to hold on to that extra pawn, they have pawn to a5, pawn to c3 doesn't work because of ab. And if CB, you're simply losing a free rook on a1 or maybe a free knight. So this is one example to show you why you should not accept the so-called Benoni gambit. So after pawn to d4 and pawn to c5, the best you can do is to go pawn to d5. And this is what I like doing. Let me show you my favorite line. If they play pawn to d6, the top played move, the truth of the matter is that this d6 pawn in the Benoni defense turns out to be a very big weakness for black, especially in the long run. For example, you go pawn to c4. If they play pawn to g6, you simply go pawn to e4. You take all the center since black doesn't want it, getting more central space. If bishop g7, you go knight c3 playing normal chess. Knight f6, you can go bishop d3 if you want, solidifying your center, or even pawn to f4, which I like because of the e5 possibility. If they castle short, you have knight to f3. Spoiler alert, whenever you see bishop g4, just go pawn to h3. They will take, and then you take back with your queen, you'll be fine. If pawn to e6, because of this upcoming check, you play bishop e2, not bishop e3, so that if they take, you can take back, and after rook e8, you don't want to castle, you can go pawn to e5 if you want, and take all the center. Look at how you're dominating the whole center. If they go knight g4, wanting to win back one pawn, this is where you can play the theoretical pawn to e6 move, which is called a clearance sacrifice, so that now your d pawn can sit to d6. So that's how you can play against the Benoni gambit instead of accepting the gambit. Similar to the Benoni gambit, the last gambit that you should never accept with all your toes is the Benko gambit, where you also start with d4, and after pawn to c5, you already know that you're not supposed to take, so you go d5, and now instead of pawn to d6 right away, black plays the second most common move, knight to f6. That's one sign for the Benko gambit. Again, you just go pawn to c4, solidifying the center. You just want to take all the center for yourself. And now pawn to b5 is what we call the Benko gambit. By the way, if you take, there are these lines where they play pawn to a6 and try to turn this into some kind of the wing gambit, where they prevent you from castling short and slow down your development. So at best, you don't just want to take on b5. The best you can do, which is also my top recommendation, is this weird looking counter gambit move, pawn to a4. You give back that pawn. This is called the Benko gambit declined, by the way. The whole idea is that if black takes your free pawn, you ignore this and continue your development. Again, you can see pawn to d6 is by far the top played move. Now you go pawn to e4, paving way for your light squared bishop. Now the threat is to take back your pawn on c4. If they defend it, forget about that pawn. This is one pawn. It's not going anywhere. You just play knight to f3, or even better, pawn to f4, which I recommended because you want to go pawn to e5. If knight bd7, the top played move, you go knight f3, you want to play pawn to e5. If they go pawn to g6, you go pawn to e5. Look at how you are cruising, man. Knight g4, they want to win back this pawn, but you have pawn to e6, messing up their pawn structure. By the way, you don't even want to take back right away. The move is knight g5. You want to take on e6 with your knight and at the same time attacking black's undefended knight. This is very bad for black, and it clearly shows why bishop s6 by black trying to protect their pawn on c4 is such a wasted move. So instead of them playing bishop s6, after you go pawn to e4 in this position, bishop s6 is a waste of time. That's why the top played move is pawn to g6. They should just allow you to take back your pawn. Now material is equal. If bishop g7, once again you can play knight to f3, but hey, nobody is stopping you from taking up the whole center. Pawn to f4. If castle short, now you go knight to f3. This time if bishop s6 comes, yeah, you can play all sorts of moves like queen e2, queen d3, or even queen b3. But theoretically speaking, bishop b5 makes a lot of sense, because if bishop takes by black, you take with your a pawn. Now your a file is open for your a rook, and if knight bd7 comes, now you have queen e2, preparing to go pawn to e5 next. If knight h5, you have pawn to e5 anyways, pawn takes, you still have two pawns on the center. If pawn to f5, you just castle short as if nothing is happening. You still have bishop g5 in the near future, and also pawn to d6, our key move. Man, you are winning. So this is how you play against the Benko Gambit like a professional. If you are still enjoying watching this video, please don't hesitate to give it a thumbs up. That's how you keep the engagement alive on my channel. Let me know what you think about this line in the comment section. Until next time, bye bye.